Don't bother coming home for Thanksgiving, darling. Charlene needs more space for her Pilates equipment, so we've cleared out your room. It's a wellness studio now. I can still hear my mother's voice, crisp and detached, filtering through the receiver of the payphone outside my dormitory. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October 20 years ago. The autumn wind in New Haven was biting swirling dead leaves around my ankles, but the chill that settled in my marrow had nothing to do with the weather. I was 19 years old, holding a plastic receiver that smelled of stale tobacco and desperation, listening to Phyllis, my mother, erase my existence from the family home with the same casual indifference she used to order a club sandwich. "What do you mean you cleared it out?" I asked, my voice trembling in a way I hated. "Where are my things? My books. Grandma Beatrice's quilt." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Phyllis sighed, the sound of ice clinking against a crystal glass audible in the background. It was 2 o'clock p.m. on a weekday. Happy hour started early at the Sterling household. We boxed up the important things and put them in the garage. The rest, well, honestly, it was mostly clutter. Charlene is at a very sensitive age, you know. She needs a sanctuary to focus on her spiritual centering. She's thinking of becoming a holistic healer this month. Charlene was 21. She had dropped out of Vassar, then Sarah Lawrence, and was currently finding herself on our parents' dime. She was the golden child, the one who inherited Phyllis's porcelain skin and Preston's charm. I was the practical one, the quiet one, the one who looked too much like Preston's mother, Beatrice, a woman they despised for her rigid morals and control over the family trust. "But where am I supposed to sleep during winter break?" I asked, looking at the gray stone of the university building, feeling the ground slide away beneath me. "Well," Phyllis said, her tone sharpening, "Preston and I discussed that. You're an adult now. We think it's time you learned some independence. Perhaps you can stay with friends, or find a little hostel. We're repainting the guest rooms too, so really, there's just no room at the inn. Besides, you've always been so resourceful." That was the word they used for neglect. Resourceful. It was the code word for every time they accidentally left me off the invitation list for the country club gala, every time I had to sew my own hem because the tailor was only hired for Charlene. "You're kicking me out," I said flatly. "We are launching you," she corrected. "Don't come home, dear. It will just be awkward for everyone. Charlene is very sensitive about her energy flow right now, and you know how heavy your presence can be." The line clicked dead. I stood there for a long time staring at the handset. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury for people who had a safety net. If you fell and nobody was there to catch you crying, only wasted oxygen. I walked back to my dorm room, which I would have to vacate in 6 weeks when the semester ended, and I looked at my bank account balance. $312. That afternoon, I made a choice. I didn't call my father Preston to beg. I knew he would just echo whatever Phyllis said, terrified of disrupting his domestic comfort. I didn't call Charlene to scream at her selfishness. Instead, I packed a single duffel bag. I sold my meal plan for cash to a sophomore down the hall. I went to the registrar's office and switched my status to part-time so I could work. I realized something profound in that cold New Haven wind. My family wasn't just eccentric or favoring one child. They were cruel, and they had just handed me the greatest gift they could possibly offer, though they didn't know it yet. They had severed the cord. They had freed me from the obligation of loving them. I swore to myself right then that when I eventually did go home, and it wouldn't be as the daughter begging for a bed in the garage. It would be as the owner of the house. The first 5 years were a blur of exhaustion and grease. I didn't go home for that Thanksgiving, nor for Christmas. I stayed in Connecticut for a while, waiting tables at a 24-hour diner near the interstate, serving truck drivers and weary travelers who looked at me with pity. I learned to balance 4 plates on one arm and how to smile when my feet were bleeding. I lived in a sublet apartment above a dry cleaner that smelled perpetually of perchloroethylene. My bedroom was a retrofitted closet with no window, just enough space for a mattress and a crate of books. I read biographies of industrial titans, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller. I obsessed over how they built something from nothing. From a distance through the society pages of the newspapers left behind by customers, I watched the Sterling family continue their performance of perfection. I saw a photo of Charlene at a debutante ball wearing a dress that cost more than my annual tuition. The caption read, "Charlene Sterling aiming for a career in bespoke jewelry design." 6 months later, another mentioned Charlene Sterling, patron of the new avant-garde sculpture garden. The holistic healer phase had apparently ended the moment the renovation on my old room was finished. I saved every penny. I ate day-old bread from the diner kitchen. I didn't buy new clothes. I mended the ones I had until the fabric was more thread than cotton. And I watched the real estate market. I had noticed something working the night shift. The diner sat on a plot of land that was zoned for mixed commercial use, but the owner, a tired man named Greek George, was drowning in debt. He wanted out. I didn't have the money to buy it, but I had the resourcefulness my mother so despised. I found a silent partner. I walked into the office of a local property investor I'd served coffee to 100 times, a terrifying woman named Bernice Hightower. Bernice was 70 years old, wore tweed suits that looked like armor, and smoked thin cigarettes in a holder. She had a reputation for eating novices alive. "You're the waitress with the sharp eyes," Bernice said when I sat uninvited in her office. "Why are you wasting my time?" "George is going to foreclose," I said, sliding a folder across her mahogany desk. "The bank will auction the diner for pennies, but the lot is adjacent to the proposed highway expansion. If you buy the debt now, you can rezone it for a logistics hub within 2 years. I've done the zoning research, it's all in there." Bernice opened the folder. She scanned my handwritten notes, my crude but accurate maps, my projections. She looked up, her eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. "And what do you want?" 5% of the back end," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "And a job. I want to learn how you do this, not the coffee-fetching part, the deal-making part." Bernice stared at me for a long minute. Then she let out a bark of laughter that sounded like a car backfiring. "You've got gall, girl. You remind me of myself before I got rich and soft. You're hired. But if you're late once I fire you." That was the beginning. Under Bernice, I learned that real estate wasn't about bricks and mortar. It was about leverage psychology and patience. I learned to spot the cracks in a facade before the inspector did. I learned that desperate people make bad decisions, and arrogant people make worse ones. I worked 18-hour days. I scouted distressed brownstones in transitioning neighborhoods. I managed contractors who tried to cheat me because I was a young woman learning to speak their language, until they feared me more than they feared the building inspectors. By the time I was 25, I had bought my first duplex. It was a rotting Victorian in a bad part of town infested with termites. I lived in one unit while I renovated the other with my own hands, sanding floors until my fingerprints were gone. When I sold it 2 years later, I tripled my investment. And all the while, I kept tabs on Preston and Phyllis. I heard through the grapevine that Preston's investments in tech startups had soured. I heard Phyllis had fired 3 housekeepers in a month. They were still summering in the Hamptons, still driving Jaguars, but the edges were fraying. They were spending principal. Old money hates spending principal. It's the cardinal sin. I was becoming a ghost in their world, a force they couldn't see, but would eventually feel. It was during my 5th year of estrangement that the letter arrived. It wasn't from my parents. It was on heavy, cream-colored bond paper with the letterhead of Penhaligon Weaver and Associates. Arthur Penhaligon had been my grandmother Beatrice's attorney for 40 years. He was the keeper of the Sterling family's secrets, a man who knew where every skeleton was buried because he had usually paid for the shovel. The letter was brief. "Please attend a meeting at my office on Tuesday the 14th, regarding the estate of Beatrice Sterling." Grandma Beatrice had died 3 years before I was kicked out. I assumed whatever she left had long been absorbed into Preston's reckless portfolio. I went to the meeting in a thrifted wool blazer sitting across from Mr. Penhaligon in a leather chair that swallowed me whole. You look like her, mister. You look like, Penhaligon said, peering over his spectacles. Around the eyes. She always said you were the only one with a spine. Thank you, I said stiffly. But I don't understand why I'm here. My father executes the trust. Your father executes the primary trust. Penhaligon corrected, a small, mischievous smile playing on his thin lips. But Beatrice was a woman of foresight. She observed how your parents treated you. She saw the disparity. And she loathed your sister's, frivolity. He opened a leather-bound folio. Beatrice created a secondary instrument, a contingency trust. It was designed to trigger only under specific conditions. Condition 1. You must be estranged from the family home for a period of no less than 5 years. Condition 2. During that time, you must not have requested or received a single cent of financial assistance from your parents. Condition 3. You must have generated an independent income exceeding the poverty line. My mouth went dry. She bet on me getting kicked out. She bet on you surviving it, Penhaligon said gently. She knew that if you stayed under their roof, they would break your spirit. She wanted to see if you could stand on your own. I have been monitoring your progress, my dear. The acquisition of the duplex on 4th Street, very sharp. Beatrice would have been pleased. He slid a check across the desk. The numbers made the room spin. It wasn't a fortune, not billions, but it was enough. It was $2.5 million. Seed money. This is yours, he said. Tax-free. But there is a caveat. Beatrice was very specific about this. No one is to know. Not your father, not your mother, and certainly not Charlene. This money is to be held in a blind trust. If you reveal its source to them before the time is right, the remainder reverts to charity. When is the time right? I asked, my fingers hovering over the check. You'll know, Penhaligon said. Beatrice said, give her the sword, Arthur. She'll know when to swing it. I took the check. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't buy a penthouse. I incorporated Beatrice Holdings, LLC. I hired Arthur Penhaligon as my retained counsel. And then I went hunting. I stopped buying small duplexes. I started buying commercial debt. I started buying the mortgages of properties that were over-leveraged by socialites who cared more about galas than interest rates. I built an empire of silence. My name appeared on no deeds. Everything was buried under layers of corporate anonymity. To the world, I was just a successful property manager. To the ledger, I was becoming the landlord of the very society that had rejected me. 15 years passed. The silence between my family and me solidified into a cold, hard wall. Occasionally, I would receive a generic Christmas card from them, signed by a secretary, usually bragging about Charlene's latest venture. Charlene is launching a luxury dog biscuit line. Charlene is exploring documentary filmmaking in Bali. Meanwhile, Beatrice Holdings grew into a monster. By the time I was 38, I owned 3 office towers in Midtown, a logistics fleet in Jersey, and vast tracts of historic farmland in the Hudson Valley. I walked through the world with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. I met Bradford during a zoning hearing. He was a federal judge 15 years my senior, a man of intellect and integrity who found my ruthlessness in business utterly charming. Bradford came from money, but he was like me. He believed wealth was a tool, not a personality trait. He loved me not for my portfolio, but for the fact that I could read a 400-page contract in 2 hours and spot the loophole. When he proposed slipping a vintage sapphire ring onto my finger over a quiet dinner at our favorite bistro, I said yes without hesitation. But then came the question of the wedding. We have to invite them, Bradford said one evening, pouring 2 glasses of Pinot Noir in our library. Why? I asked, looking up from my laptop. They haven't called me in a decade, Brad. They don't know who I am. They think I'm still struggling. Because you need closure, he said. And because if you don't invite them, They become the victims in the story they tell their friends. Oh, our ungrateful daughter didn't even invite us. Don't give them that ammunition. Invite them. Let them come. Let them see you. He was right. But I decided that if they were coming, they were going to play by my rules. I had been tracking Preston and Phyllis's finances for years. It wasn't hard. Beatrice Holdings owned the bank that held the second mortgage on their estate. I knew they were drowning. They had liquidated Preston's 401k. They had sold the summer cottage in Martha's Vineyard quietly to cover Charlene's failed organic perfume lawsuit. They were hanging on by their fingernails, terrified of being exposed as insolvent. They had no idea that the investment group that had kindly refinanced their loans, giving them just enough rope to hang themselves, was me. I decided to host the wedding at the Vane estate. It was a Gilded Age mansion on the Rhode Island cliffs, a place of staggering beauty and history. It was one of the most exclusive venues on the East Coast. It was also my private residence, though I kept that fact out of the society papers. I sent the invitations, heavy cardstock letterpressed in gold. I didn't put my company name on it. Just the wedding of Lorraine Sterling and Bradford Halloway. The RSVP came back 2 weeks later. It was a note scrawled on the back of the response card in my mother's jagged, frantic handwriting. Lorraine, darling. We were so surprised to hear the news. A judge good for you. We assume this will be a modest, quaint affair given your circumstances. We will attend, of course. We must support you. Preston says we can contribute $500 toward the flowers if you need it. We can write it off as a charitable donation. Please ensure Charlene is seated at the head table. She has recently been featured in a local blog and expects a certain visibility. Mother. I handed the card to Bradford. He read it and chuckled a deep rumbling sound. Charitable donation, that's rich. They have no idea, I said, staring at the card. They think I'm marrying a sugar daddy. They think I'm renting a hall at the YMCA. Let them think it, Bradford said, kissing my temple. The reveal is always the best part of the magic trick. I planned the wedding with military precision. I didn't want opulence for the sake of showing off. I wanted elegance. I wanted the kind of old money aesthetic that my parents pretended to have, but had long ago replaced with flashy new money gaudiness to hide their debt. I hired the Boston Symphony Orchestra to play the processional. I flew in a chef from Paris who specialized in 19th century banquet styles. I arranged for security that would rival a presidential visit. But the most important preparation was with Arthur Penhaligon. He was now 85, frail but sharp as a tack. Are the documents ready? I asked him a week before the ceremony. Signed, sealed, and ready to be delivered. Arthur wheezed, his eyes twinkling. You know this is incredibly petty, Lorraine. It's not petty, Arthur, I said, adjusting the silk of my dress. It's an eviction. I'm just giving them the proper notice. It's justice. He corrected himself. I'll be there. Front row. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The stage was set. The players were in motion. And I, the daughter who was kicked out for a Pilates studio, was about to welcome them home. The morning of the wedding was crisp and bright, the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the cliffs below the Vane estate with a rhythmic, thunderous applause. The lawn was a carpet of manicured emerald dotted with white tents that billowed in the sea breeze. I watched from the window of the master suite on the 3rd floor. I saw the line of cars beginning to snake up the long, winding driveway. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, town cars with diplomatic flags. My friends and colleagues were arriving. Senators, tech CEOs, literary giants, and the quiet titans of industry who ran the world from behind closed doors. Then I saw it. A leased white Mercedes, a model 3 years old, weaving slightly as it navigated the gravel. My parents. I could almost hear the conversation inside that car. Down at the entrance, my head of security, a massive man named Mr. Graves, greeted them. I had a camera feed on my iPad. I watched as Preston stepped out, adjusting a tuxedo that looked a bit tight around the middle. Phyllis emerged in a dress that was too loud, a bright fuchsia that clashed with the serene coastal tones of the venue. Charlene followed wearing white. Of course she wore white. A cream-colored lace cocktail dress that looked suspiciously bridal. Good Lord, I heard Phyllis's voice on the audio feed. Look at this place. Do you think he's renting it? Who is this judge? He must be ancient if he can afford to rent the Vane estate. Probably up to his eyeballs in debt, Preston sneered, looking around at the immaculately landscaped gardens. This reeks of new money trying too hard. Lorraine probably tricked him into it. Where is the valet? Charlene whined, tossing her keys at Mr. Graves. Be careful with that, it's a classic. It wasn't a classic, it was just used. They walked toward the main entrance, heads held high, noses sniffing the air as if they smelled something rotting. They looked at the other guests, women in vintage Chanel, men in Savile Row suits, and I saw the confusion flicker in their eyes. They didn't recognize anyone. These weren't the social climbers they hung out with. These were the people who owned the ladders. They were directed not to the main hall, but to the bridal holding area. I had arranged for a family moment before the ceremony. I wanted them to see me. I wanted to hear what they had to say when they thought we were alone. I was standing in front of the floor-to-length mirror in the bridal suite when the door burst open. I wore a gown of heavy ivory silk, structurally simple but cut by a designer in Milan who only made 5 dresses a year. It fit me like a second skin. My hair was swept up, pinned with a diamond comb that had belonged to Beatrice, one item I had managed to steal back from the garage before I left all those years ago. Phyllis stopped in the doorway. Charlene pushed past her. Well, Phyllis said, her eyes raking over me. It's simple, very plain. I suppose that's best given your figure. Hello, Mother, I said, turning to face them. Preston, Charlene. You didn't tell us it was a costume party, Charlene said, gesturing to her own dress. I feel overdressed. Is this off the rack? It looks like something from a department store. It's custom, I said softly. Preston grunted, looking around the room. So where is this husband? Is he in a wheelchair? I hope he has good life insurance, Lorraine. We don't want you coming back to us when he kicks the bucket. We've barely got the guest room back in order after Charlene's podcast studio didn't work out. It was a media empire, Dad, Charlene snapped. Then she turned to me with a smirk. You know we were just talking about you on the drive up. Remember when Mom turned your room into my wellness center? God, you were so dramatic about that. But honestly, look at you now. You survived. It was the best thing we ever did for you. Toughened you up. You should be thanking us. Thanking you, I repeated, testing the words. Yes, Phyllis said, examining a vase of white hydrangeas and wrinkling her nose. If we hadn't pushed you out of the nest, you'd still be moping around reading books. Now you've managed to snag a provider. Even if this wedding is clearly a financial stretch. I hope you haven't taken out loans in our name. Preston checks his credit report weekly. I haven't taken out loans in your name, I said. I bought them, I thought. Good, Charlene said. She walked over and touched the fabric of my dress with greasy fingers. Because I'm getting married next spring and we're going to need the liquid capital. My wedding is going to be real society, Lori. Not whatever this rented pageant is. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw the fraying threads on Preston's cuffs. I saw the desperate amount of filler in Phyllis's cheeks. I saw the insecurity vibrating off Charlene like heat waves. They were small, they were terrified, and they were standing in the middle of a room that cost more to furnish than their entire net worth. I'm glad you're here, I said, and I meant it. You really haven't changed a bit. It makes what happens next much easier. What happens next? Phyllis asked, distracted by her reflection. Oh, the vows, do try not to mumble, dear. It's so unbecoming. The ceremony was held on the cliffside terrace. The wind had died down, leaving the air crisp and smelling of salt and roses. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Penhaligon. My father had refused to walk me unless I paid for his suit, So I declined. I saw the moment the reality hit my parents. They were seated in the second row. The first row was reserved for honored friends, a slight they clearly fumed over. As they looked around, Preston froze. He was staring at a man 3 seats down. It was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of the bank that held Preston's mortgage. Marcus was smiling at me, dabbing his eyes. Then Phyllis grabbed Preston's arm. She was looking at the woman reading the first passage. It was Senator Evelyn Vance, a woman Phyllis had been trying to get a lunch meeting with for 6 years. Senator Vance wasn't just attending, she was officiating. I reached the altar. Bradford took my hands. He looked handsome, distinguished, and incredibly amused by the look on my father's face. "Dearly beloved," Senator Vance began. I tuned out the words, focusing on the feeling of victory. It wasn't a loud, screaming victory. It was a quiet, heavy certainty. I looked at Charlene. She was scrolling on her phone, probably checking to see if anyone famous was tagging the location. She looked bored. When the ceremony ended and Bradford kissed me, the applause was thunderous. We turned to walk back up the aisle. Preston stood up, a plastered smile on his face, reaching out to shake Marcus Thorne's hand as the banker passed. "Marcus, good to see you," Preston boomed, trying to claim familiarity. Marcus Thorne stopped. He looked at Preston with cool, polite confusion. "Preston, I didn't know you knew Mrs. Halloway." "Mrs. Oh, Lorraine," Preston laughed nervously. "She's my daughter. I raised her." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He looked from Preston to me, then back. "Is that so funny? She never mentioned you. I know her as the woman who saved my bank from the 08 crisis by buying our distressed commercial assets. A brilliant mind." Preston's jaw dropped. What? "Lorraine is Beatrice Holdings," Marcus said, dropping the bomb casually as he moved to follow the bride. "Excuse me, I need to congratulate her on the merger." I didn't turn around. I kept walking, holding Bradford's hand, feeling the ground beneath my feet. My ground. The reception was held in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the gilded ceiling. The centerpiece of the room was a massive ice sculpture of the Manhattan skyline, a nod to the empire I had built. We skipped the father-daughter dance. Instead, Bradford and I danced to Etta James. Then the speeches began. After the best man, Charlene stumbled up to the microphone. She had found the open bar immediately. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly askew. "Hi, everyone," she slurred, tapping the mic. "I'm the sister, the pretty one usually." She laughed, but nobody else did. The room was silent. "I just want to say, cheers to Lori. 20 years ago, Mom and Dad and I made a tough call. We kicked her out, took her room, turned it into a yoga studio. And you know what? It was the best thing for her. Look at this." She gestured vaguely at the room. "She clearly married rich to show us up. But we know the truth. I toughened her up. I made her. So, you're welcome, Lori. Don't forget who made you hungry." She raised her glass. The silence was excruciating. A few people coughed. I stood up. I walked to the stage and gently took the microphone from my sister's hand. "Thank you, Charlene," I said, my voice amplified, clear and steady. "You're right. You did make me hungry. And hunger is a powerful motivator." I looked out at the crowd. Then I looked at my parents, who were shrinking in their seats. "I have one more speaker," I announced. "Mr. Arthur Penhaligon." The old lawyer shuffled up to the stage. He carried a document holder. He adjusted the mic, looking at Preston and Phyllis, like a judge staring at a guilty defendant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur rasped, "I am the executor of the late Beatrice Sterling's estate. For 20 years there has been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership of the Sterling family home at 44 Oak Lane." Preston stood up. "Now see here, Arthur, this is a wedding, not a—" "Sit down, Preston," Arthur snapped. The command was so sharp, Preston collapsed back into his chair. "The deed to the house," Arthur continued, "contained a preservation clause. Beatrice Sterling left the house to her son Preston, on the condition that the structure and interior allocation of rooms remain unchanged for a period of 25 years. Specifically, she wished to preserve the sanctuary of her grandchildren. He pulled a paper from the folder. However, 20 years ago, a renovation was filed with the city. A bedroom was converted into a wellness studio. This was a material breach of the trust. Under the terms of the will, in the event of such a breach, the title of the property does not transfer to Preston Sterling. Instead, it reverts to the contingency trust. Arthur turned to me. The sole beneficiary of the contingency trust is Lorraine Sterling, now Lorraine Halloway. The breach was noted 20 years ago, but the trust allowed the tenants to remain on a month-to-month basis, purely at the discretion of the beneficiary. The room gasped. It was a sound like air being sucked out of a vacuum. "Preston Phyllis," Arthur said, looking over his glasses. "You haven't owned that house for 2 decades. You have been living there as guests of your daughter. Guests who, I might add, have been exceptionally rude." The reception continued, but my family was gone. They had fled, the ballroom faces burning, retreating to the library of the estate to hide from the pitying stares of the elite they so desperately wanted to impress. I found them there an hour later. They were huddled on a leather sofa. Phyllis was weeping silently. Preston was staring at the floor, his face gray. Charlene was pacing, sobered up by shock. "Is it true?" Preston whispered when I walked in. "You own the house. You own everything." "I own the house," I said, standing near the door. "I also own the mortgage on your summer home. I own the debt on your car, Charlene. Beatrice Holdings bought the paper 3 years ago." "Why?" Phyllis choked out. "Why didn't you tell us? We could have been a family." "We were a family," I said. "And you threw me away because I took up too much space. You told me to be resourceful. So I was." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a white envelope. I walked over and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. "What is this?" Charlene asked, her voice trembling. "It's an eviction notice," I said. "You have 30 days to vacate 44 Oak Lane. I'm selling it. A developer wants to knock it down and build condos. I think it's a good investment." "You can't do that," Preston shouted, standing up. "That's our home. Where will we go?" "I hear there are some lovely hostels in the city," I said, echoing my mother's words from 20 years ago. "Or perhaps you can stay with friends. You're adults. It's time you learned some independence. We're launching you." "Lorraine, please," Phyllis begged, reaching for my hand. "We're your parents. We're old. We have no savings." I pulled my hand away. It wasn't done with malice. It was just done. "I know," I said, "and that breaks my heart. But the room is gone, Mother. You cleared it out a long time ago. There's no space for you anymore." I turned and walked to the door. "Wait!" Charlene cried. "Lori, please. What about me? I can't be homeless." I stopped and looked back at my sister, the girl who had taken my room and my place in the world, only to squander it all. "You're a healer, aren't you, Charlene?" I asked. "I'm sure you'll find a way to manifest a roof over your head." I closed the library door, shutting them in with the silence of their own making. I walked back out to the terrace. The stars were out, diamonds scattered across the velvet black of the night. Bradford was waiting for me by the stone railing, 2 glasses of champagne in his hand. "Done?" he asked softly. "Done," I said. I took the glass and looked out at the ocean. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I had carried since I was 19 years old. I wasn't the girl in the garage anymore. I wasn't the waitress. I wasn't the ghost. I was Lorraine Sterling Halloway, and I was finally home. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat at theirs, leave 1 in the comments. Do you think Lorraine went too far, or did her family get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.